始まってます。
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a few minutes past 10 o'clock in the morning here in Japan. Time for the opening of the 22nd IAHR-APD Congress 2020 in Sapporo. My name is Norihiro Izumi. I'm a professor in Hokkaido University and the moderator of this opening session. I'm very much pleased to be here in the Zoom room with all of you online. It is a bit cloudy, but almost sunny today in Sapporo, around 20 degrees Celsius, much cooler and much more comfortable than any other place in Japan. Were it not for COVID-19, we would get together to have this opening session here in Hokkaido University, not online. In the afterglow of the Olympic Games, particularly the marathon, in which a number of great runners should have run through the beautiful campus of this Hokkaido University. The number of new infections with the new coronavirus yesterday in Japan was about 270. There were about 8 new cases in Hokkaido. Not so many, but not so few. Even under these circumstances, more than 60 people can be seen getting together in a real physical room on the campus, specially set up for this opening. Please show the room. Hello, friends.
そっち見せて。Yeah.
Wait.
Hello. Hello, friends. They seem all excited at the opening of this Congress. Okay, first of all, I would like to introduce Professor Yasuyuki Shimizu, Hokkaido University, chair of this IAHR-APD Congress 2020 in Sapporo, who is not only a great professor of hydraulics, numerical simulation, and fluvial morphology in particular, also probably one of the best tennis players in Hokkaido University. I would like Professor Shimizu to make an opening address for this Congress.
Thank you, Professor Izumi. Oh, let me see. Can you see my face? Everybody? No. Okay, let me see.
Yes.
見えてる ?OK。スライドショー。Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Izumi. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Yasuyuki Shimizu, LOC chairman of today's meeting. It's my great honor to welcome to our 22nd IAHR-APD conference on behalf of the local organizing committee. I want to extend heartfelt thoughts to all our members, friends, and colleagues around the world during these challenging times. I'd like to start by extending special thanks to our sponsors for making this possible. The Hokkaido government, the city of Sapporo, the Ministry of Land Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, Civil Engineering Research Institute, River Center of Hokkaido, School of Engineering of Hokkaido University. Thanks to all our sponsors for their continued support. Also, I want to thank our keynote speakers. These are our keynote speakers of this Congress. And we asked more than 60% to chair each session. Thank you very much. I would like to express our great appreciation to all the staff of IHR and IHR-APD for their endless and excellent support to the Congress. Especially, I want to thank Dr. Gregory DuCosta, chairman of the IHR-APD Executive Committee, for this support and useful suggestion to hold this conference. And Dr. Joseph Hun-Wei Lee, the president of IHR, for his warm support. Finally, I want to thank all the participants that joined today's regardless the time zone difference. We are truly grateful to all of you. It's your support and hard work that enabled us to put this event together. Actually, it was 4 years ago, 2016, we joined the 20th Congress of IHR-APD in Colombo, Sri Lanka, when we applied to host the 22nd IHR-APD Congress. We are really honored to be selected to organize this event in the executive committee meeting there. In 2018, we joined 21st IHR-APD Congress in Yogyakarta for the promotion of today's event. Also last year, we participated in the IHR World Congress in Panama City, Panama, trying to reach as many people as possible. We started calling for abstracts from July last year, and finally, we received more than 500 abstract submissions, which was much more than we expected. However, as you know, after early this year, COVID-19 pandemic presented a big challenge for us. And after long and serious discussion, we finally decided to have all our conference online. We had to reorganize everything, all the system for online meeting within very short time. And we record the papers, abstracts, and posters, everything for online again. We are really worried about whether we could receive as many submissions as it was face-to-face meeting. But with the cooperation of many people, we finally accepted about 200 papers and 80 posters, which are quite acceptable numbers for the IHR-APD meetings. Although you cannot visit Sapporo City this time, we have prepared a unique virtual technical tour to show you around the wonderful landscape of city of Sapporo and islands Hokkaido. For example, this is when you visit the virtual technical tour page of our website. For example, this is Tokachi River. We have a large experimental flume there. And this is a real scale Levy Bridge experiment. You can experience, you cannot visit today, this time, but you can experience the real scale experiment there in our website. Okay, so today we have the honor to hold the first online IHR-APD conference. While we certainly miss the gathering of our community in person, but we believe this is the best approach for the well-being and comfort for our global audience. Our conference theme, which is creating resilience to water-related challenges, is more important today than ever before as climate change effects are increasing over time. Phrase was adopted as the main theme of the Congress to maintain awareness of climate change and water-related disaster induced by extreme weather. As every year, the Congress encourages meaningful interactions among researchers, industries, and communities on the dissemination of water-related research achievements and ideas that paves the way for sustainable water and environmental-related development. I hope you enjoyed the 2 days Congress and find this new experience as enjoyable and fruitful as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shimizu.
Thank you.
Now I'm very much honored to introduce Professor Joseph Hunwei Lee in Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, the president of IAHR, one of the few presidents elected from Asian countries ever. I would like to ask President Lee to address a few words at this opening.
Thank you, Professor Izumi. Dear Professor Shimizu, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of IHR, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all to this 22nd IHR-APD Congress hosted by Hokkaido University in Sapporo, Japan. I'd like to first congratulate the local organizing committee for mounting an attractive scientific program amidst all the difficult times, difficult challenges. IHR-APD Congress is an important IHR tradition. I'm very pleased to see this taking place on schedule. So what I'd like to do is to take a couple of minutes to say something about IHR and the recent happenings with a couple of slides. So I'll first share my screen first, just let me just, so, IHR is a global international organization. It is oldest water organization founded in 1935 by the heads of hydraulic research institutes in Europe. So we are celebrating our 85th anniversary this year. And over the past 85 years, IHR has made great contributions to the development of water engineering and the protection of the environment. And IHR, as you can see from this slide, is really a community of scholars, over 4,000 individual members, over 120 institute members from 98 countries, and 5 regional divisions. And I would say it's a truly international organization that produces high quality knowledge products that lead the industry. Our IHR monographs have been defining the frontier of hydraulic research in fields from environmental fluid mechanics, hydraulic structures to water quality control. And many of our institute members have provided the scientific and engineering know-how to support sustainable development in many countries, ranging from the design of infrastructure works to adaptive management to address the impacts of climate change. And even just last week, we hosted a webinar on global water security headed by Professor Roger Faulkner. Now, despite the unprecedented challenges brought about by the COVID pandemic, we have developed a new strategic plan for the next 4 years, which has 3 elements. Well, one is increased global presence. Second is to inspire and catalyze state-of-the-art knowledge. And third is to promote diversity and international collaboration. And our strategic direction is best illustrated by this event, this forthcoming event. Later this year in December 2020, we will be hosting the 85th IHR Anniversary Summit. And there will be 2 HydroLink issues in honor of the 85th anniversary, the September issue and the December issue. And the purpose of this summit, largely online like this one, is really to connect the technical committees to work together towards the World Congress in Granada next year. Hopefully we'll have a physical event, but nobody has a crystal ball. But basically we are working on 3 themes in line with the strategic plan, and this is illustrated in this summit: eco-hydraulics, artificial intelligence and water security in Africa. This program is still in the making. This is a draft version, and you'll hear more from us. And the hope is to engage our younger colleagues as well as the leaders of the community as much as possible. And you see, we will have a session on eco-hydraulics. In fact, mainly a nature-based solution kind of discussion as well as keynote lectures. We will have actually a special issue on AI and water in December, and then we will bring in entrepreneurs and IT giants to speak on AI and water. And finally, we will have a session to engage our colleagues from Africa, and Professor Jörg Imberger will share his vision on Africa, and we will have contributions from Sub-Saharan Africa, and also talk about water challenges in Africa and connection with policy. So basically, this is what is forthcoming, and to kind of keep the momentum going. In fact, we have been meeting every month online. As you know, Zoom meetings are very tiring as well. So please stay tuned for future announcements. And in closing, I would like to thank IAHR-APD for such a nice event, and I'd like to thank Hokkaido University for hosting this. Although I've never been to Hokkaido, I look forward to it. It's very famous for stratified flow and many hydraulic research. And I wish this Congress every success. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, President Lee. Thank you. Now, I am proud to introduce Professor Gregory De Costa, Open Polytechnic of New Zealand, Chair of IAHR-APD. I would like to ask Professor Gregory De Costa to deliver a few words.
Thank you, Professor Izumi. And good morning, friends. Konnichiwa. As chairman of the IAHR-APD Executive Committee, it is an honor and privilege to welcome you today to the 22nd IAHR-APD Congress, our first ever web-based IAHR-APD Congress. Moreover, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this Congress hosted in Japan, as I myself did my PhD studies in Japan. Hence, permit me to speak a few words in Japanese. 本日は第22回 IHR-APD 総会の開会式で私が IHR-APD の会長を務めているだけでなく、日本が6年間勉強して日本に住んでいて、私にとって特別な国であるという理由でお話できてとてもよろしく思います。As you all know, it was to be a physical Congress. However, due to the volatility of the situation and this pandemic, I recall a few months back discussing and Professor Shimizu, with Professor Shimizu, and taking the decision to go for a Congress web-based as scheduled without going to change any of the dates, postponing, etc. I have to sincerely thank Professor Shimizu and his team, including Professor Izumi, Toshiki, Satomi Kyuka, and others, for the flexibility and excellent organizing of this Congress web-based in such a short time. Thank you, Professor Shimizu and the organizing team. Professor Lee spoke to you about IAHR and its membership of 4,200 odd members worldwide. Let me speak about the APD, and of which 2,097, nearly half of them are from the Asia Pacific region. While nearly 1,000 are individual members and another 1,000 are young professional members, 42 are institute members. We have a significant membership from China, Japan, and India. We then have good numbers from Australia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, Korea, Indonesia, New Zealand, Singapore, Vietnam, Turkey, and Taiwan. In addition, we have few members from Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Georgia, Mongolia, Thailand, and Tajikistan. To this, we also have the MENA region, from which we have members from Iran, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, Iraq, UAE, Oman, Morocco, Algeria, and Israel. So as you could see, it's a worldwide strong organization. We do have our journal as well, the Journal of Hydroenvironmental Research, which is a well-reputed and a worldwide recognized journal. As much as we are a vibrant and strong association, it would be nice to see us grow and new members joining in. Hence, do not hesitate to talk to your colleagues about IAHR-APD activity. I am certain this Congress will be of great success with in-depth discussion on the issues raised during the Congress. Within the Congress, we have a continuing special series and a session entitled to Historical Water Projects and Traditional Water Technologies in the Asia Pacific region, which aims to rediscover and discussing historical water projects and traditional water technologies of international importance. The success of any organization or any Congress finally depends on its participants. I sincerely thank all of you for your kind participation and interest in IHR-APD activity. I wish you all a highly productive Congress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gregory De Costa. Thank you. Thank you for your good Japanese.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's move to the IAHR-APD Heritage Award. This award is conferred by IAHR during one or more of the APD congresses on a local infrastructure of lasting and international importance. Professor Gregory De Costa, you are invited to be the presenter of this award.
Thank you. It's my pleasure here. So the Asia Pacific Division of International Association for Hydro-Environmental Engineering and Research, IAHR-APD Heritage Award. This year, it goes out to three very special sites in Japan. So in no particular order, I'll read out the three sites, and I presume they will be introduced in detail as we go on. The first one, Osaka Prefecture and Osaka Sayama City, Japan, for the Sayama Ike Reservoir. The second one, Tatsumi Aqueduct District, Kanazawa City, and Ishikawa Prefecture for the Tatsumi Aqueduct in Kanazawa City. And the third one, Hokkaido Regional Development Bureau, well, our host city, the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, Japan, and Hokkaido government for the flood controls and water utilization facilities in the Ishikari River Basin. So that's the three, and I will leave it to the persons to introduce the project with the relevant videos.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor De Costa. It's our great pleasure to make an introduction of Sayama Reservoir, Osaka Prefecture and the Osaka Sayama City. I'm Tetsuya Sumi from Kyoto University. On behalf of the Yoshiyuki Clark, director of the Osaka Prefecture Sayama Museum, briefly introduce the history and the hydraulic and uniqueness of the Sayama Reservoir. The Sayama Reservoir is the oldest irrigation dam reservoir in Japan, and the various information dam type pond was transmitted from China and the Korean peninsula, and finally came to Japan at the building in 616. This is the East Asian dam type pond road. And the other unique point is this irrigation dam is has an irrigation network like this. Sakima Pond is like a main reservoir. And in case of a water shortage in the distributed area, Sayama Pond will additional supply the water to the downstream area. And another unique point is the Sayama Reservoir is periodically improved like this as a dam heightening and increasing the storage volume. And finally, recently, 1988, Sayama Reservoir is changed for the original irrigation pond. Now is a multi-purpose dams, including flood control purpose. And the last one is Sayama Reservoir has a unique intake structure called shakuhachihi, almost similar as a modern intake structure, selective water level. This is also very much a unique point. So please let's enjoy the video of Sayama Reservoir. So video, please, from the office.
Okay, just a
Maike Pond is located in the middle of Nishioke River in Sayama, Osaka. It was built 1,400 years ago in the Asuka period and irrigates the Kawachi Plain. The water flows in and out from rivers. Triggered by disastrous flood, the Heisei Improvement Project in 1982 aimed to convert the irrigation pond to a multi-purpose reservoir. A cultural property survey found several facilities from the Asuka period in the northern part of the pond, such as the Higashihi, Nakahi, and Nishihi water pipelines. Dendrochronology revealed that these water pipelines were made from wood cut in 616. This proved that Sayamaike Pond was completed in the early 7th century. Another discovery were wooden materials and water intakes used during the Keicho Improvement Project in the Edo period. During improvement works in the Edo period, a stone gutter from 1202 in the Kamakura period was reused. These properties found during the Heisei Improvement Project were designated as National Important Cultural Properties in 2014 and highlight the history of civil engineering. This is a model of the canal network during the Edo period exhibited in Sayamaike Museum. The canals originate from Sayamaike Pond and distribute water to downstream ponds with the Nakahi and Nishihi water pipelines. In this way, Sayamaike Pond was an important irrigation source. Sayamaike Museum displays the canal network model, the 3 historical water pipelines, the North Bank saved in full size, and the 1,400-year history of multiple improvement works. This is Sayamaike Pond at present. Water from the Nishioke and Mitsuya rivers are stored in the pond and distributed downstream to irrigation facilities through the Nishioke and Higashioke rivers just as 1,400 years ago. Please enjoy the rich history of Sayamaike Pond. And this building on the north side of the pond is Sayamaike Museum. We look forward to your visit.
Okay, thank you very much for have an opportunity to show this video. At the end of my presentation, this photo is taken by the after receiving the award. Backside, you can see the Sayamaike Pond and the museum. This is Yoshiyuki Clark. He's the director of the Osaka Prefecture Sayamaike Museum. He's very much glad to receive this Water Heritage Asian Water Heritage Award. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Tamai-sensei.
Hello,
Please.
everybody. My name is Nobuyuki Tamai, past president of IAHR. Joseph and Gregory, I'm very glad to see you on this occasion. Now I'm serving as the president of NPO for Wise Learning on Tatsumi Architect. This NPO recommended Tatsumi Architect for APD Heritage Award. I'd like to introduce Tatsumi Architect, completed in 1632, briefly by a video clip. Video, please. At first, please look at current views of Tatsumi Architect. In initial 7 slides, only titles and photos are presented. On this slide, the left picture shows a main tunnel and an adit. The right picture shows an adit system described in the historical drawing. The system was quite advantageous for making simultaneous tunnel excavation possible, for smooth removal of tunnel spoils, and for better ventilation. This diagram shows an overview of the inverted siphon. The inverted siphon overcame a large head difference of more than 10 meters. It was an outstanding and innovative hydraulic structure at that time. What can we recognize in the study tour of the tunnel of Tetsumi Aqueduct? Number 1, safe working environment by light on the wall. Number 2, skillful techniques and hard work of workers. In conclusion, Tetsumi Aqueduct passed on its superior hydro environment engineering technology to the present. At the end of my presentation, I'd like to introduce heads of 3 governing organizations. Mr. Yoshida, at the leftmost, is president of Tatsumi Aqueduct District. Mr. Yamano, at the center, is mayor of Kanazawa City. Mr. Jogasaki, at the rightmost, is director of Civil Engineering Department, Ishikawa Prefecture. Next slide, please. Dear IHR members, thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you. This is the end of my talk.
Good morning. I'm Kon from Hokkaido University. I'll introduce the third APD water heritage, Ishikari River, Hokkaido, Japan. Please watch the video.
This is the Ishikari River basin in Hokkaido. It is the second largest river in Japan. The full-scale land reclamation of Hokkaido started in 1871. However, this cold northern part of Japan was a primeval swamp and peatland that hindered with its reclamation. Drainage canals were constructed to deal with the swamp soil of Ishikari Basin. At that time, the basin was suffering from repeated flooding. Frequent damage caused by flood also hindered its reclamation. Flood control measures like construction of cut-off channels to divert and lower the discharge were implemented. So far, nearly 29 cut-off channels have been constructed at the Ishikari main river channel. The cut-off channels have provided a dramatic improvement in safety from flood. This also reduced the water level of the mainstream and tributaries throughout the year. The ends of agricultural drainage networks were connected to small rivers. The improvement in small tributaries lowered river water levels and groundwater levels near the tributaries, greatly contributing to the development of agricultural land. The water level of the mainstream and tributaries decreased, improving the trunk and branch channels. The prototype for irrigation drainage systems in the Ishikari Basin was developed during this period. The development and appropriate management of river flood control and water utilization facilities in the basin resulted in wetlands being converted to paddy fields in a short period of time. The peatland in this cold region soon transformed into one of Japan's leading rice cultivation areas. The transformation of this region into a major economic zone was realized in a relatively short period of about 100 years. The Ishikari River Basin, with approximately 100,000 hectares of paddy fields in the areas at the middle and lower reaches, has been transformed into one of Japan's largest economic zones and granaries. The conversion of such peatland into vast paddy fields is rare and one of its kind in the world. The development of this region would not have been possible without the improvement and appropriate management of river flood control and water utilization facilities of the Ishikari River Basin. Thank you for your attention.
「この度は栄誉ある賞をいただき誠にありがとうございます。石狩川流域の整備に尽力されてきた先人の努力に敬意を表するとともに、関係機関と連携し引き続き流域の発展に努めてまいります。
この度は、日本を代表する水遺産として、石狩川の治水・立水を選定をいただきまして、大変光栄に思います。今日の石狩川流域繁栄のため熱意を持って取り組まれました先人の皆様に感謝いたしますとともに、今後とも流域の安全の確保や発展に努めてまいります。ありがとうございます。
That's all. Thank you very much.
Well, this is the end of the Water Heritage Award. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, then I would like to close the opening session. Thank you for your participation. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done.
昨日と別のズームになっちゃう。どれだけできないんだ。うん。ほら、これがサイド上なんだわ。これ。うん。Keynote is different ID, so please join.
No, it's same. Same
ID. Please wait, if you want to join the keynote lecture, please.
Okay, maybe before keynote, we would like to announce some notes for the online conference. Yeah, this is Toshiki Iwasaki, Hokkaido University, a member of LOC of IAHR-APD2020. So here I would like to announce about the Zoom things that we will use for this meeting. So the first thing is please use the most updated version of Zoom before joining the online meeting to avoid some troubles. This slide is showing how to check the update of Zoom in the case of Windows 10 OS. So on the right bottom corner of your screen, like that, you will find the Zoom here, and then right-click on the Zoom. Then you can check for updates. If the update is available, please update it and restart the Zoom. This is the first thing. The second thing is that you can rename your Zoom name. It will help to know who joins the meeting, who is presenter, chair, and who wants to ask a question. On the bottom of Zoom window, you will see this icon, participants. Just click this, and you will see the list of participants on the right side of the window, like this. You will see your name at the top of the list. Click More and rename your Zoom name. Especially in the session where you will give a talk, you will rename like presenter plus your name. So this is second thing. The third thing is about microphone and webcam. For participants, basically please turn off your microphone and camera. This is to reduce the load of the internet. So when you ask questions, you will turn on the microphone, but webcam may be optional. The last thing, to ask a question, we will use raise hand function, which is located on the right bottom corner of the Zoom. Here, click this, then you can raise your hand on Zoom. Then chairperson will pick you up. So this is a brief explanation of how to participate this online APD conference. We also have poster on our website, so please check the posters. So we hope you enjoy this virtual conference. Thank you for your attention. So keynote will start at 11 a.m. Japan time in the same room. So just a moment.
Hello? Hello? これか。うわぁ。んどれどれ全然見えない。
キーノートの123。
OK。スミ。OK、OK。チャレンジ。OK、OK。OK。Hello? May I start the keynote?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's time 11 o'clock. Let me start keynote lectures of today. I am Yasuki Shimizu from Hokkaido University. I will chair the keynote lecture today. The first keynote lecture today is Professor Sumi from Kyoto University. He's a distinguished professor in the river engineering, especially the dam engineering in Japan. The title of his keynote lecture is Challenges on Flood and Sediment Management of Dams under Changing Climate in Japan. So, Professor Sumi, please.
Thank you for a kind introduction. It's my great honor to have a keynote speech today. So this is title of today's talk. Here is a three photo of the interesting dams. One is a flood control optimization in Hiyoshi Dam. And the second in the one is Tsuruda Dam in Kagoshima Prefecture, upgrading project for flood control. And the last one is upgrading for sediment management. I will talk many dam projects currently improved for flood and sediment management under changing climate in Japan. So here's my talk. First one, the recent flood disaster in Japan. And the second one, under these conditions, how we should design or plan and implement dam upgrading. And the last one is how to optimize this flood and sediment management using the rainfall prediction. This is the new challenge. So 2018, we have heavy rainfall in mostly Western Japan, based on the rain-flown typhoon after the 7. And record-breaking heavy rain occurred this area. And this was one of the worst flood damage in recent 30 years in Japan. You can see there human losses is more than 200, and many houses damaged and inundated in this area. And if we consider why this kind of damage occurred, this is a record is a maximum 24 hours rainfall. And if we consider the compared to the recent historical record, to consider the excess ratio to those historical maximum one, here is Hiroshima and this is Hiroshima area is we have many sediment related disasters, and the Okayama area, Takashi River is also severe flooded. And the Hiji River in the Ehime in the Shikoku Island also a severe problem occurred. So this one is very much related to the excess ratio. Of course, some area is more high rainfall occurred, but some area is already periodically receiving such kind of events. So already river improvement work, dam operation is adapted, but sometimes is this kind of excess impact occurred is too much damage may occur. And regarding the dam operation, more than 200 dams is executed in over western part of Japan. Unfortunately, 8 dams, these dams is conducted emergency spillway gate operation, to almost full of water at the surcharge level, and started to open the gates. That is some big gap to the downstream discharge impact. And this is one example in the Hiyoshi Dam, upstream Katsura River near Kyoto City, belong to the Japan Water Agency. This dam has like a large storage volume, and the flood peak is successfully reduced like this, and to reduce the downstream Arashiyama or Kameoka City area. But at the end of the last peak, in the fourth peak, almost full of water, they started to open the gate. This kind of like almost full surcharge cases is now critically increasing. And this is another example in the Shikoku Island, Nomura Dam and the downstream Kanoga Dam, 2 dams is conducted this kind of spillway gate operation. Unfortunately, downstream like river is almost full of water or sometimes flooded, and critical damage occurred. This is actual like a record of hydrograph. Blue is inflow and the red one is outflow. This dam is like originally like irrigation and flood control purpose. Of course, preliminary drawdown conducted, but too much inflow coming, almost sharply increasing the outflow discharge. Because of that, more than 200 houses inundated and 5 casualties in downstream dams occurred. So important lessons is we should understand the like limited storage volume and to compare to the inflows extreme flood impacts. And the second one is how to consider matching the flood control and the downstream river improvement, channel improvement. And the last one is how to communicate dam office and the downstream municipalities and the residents. So these 3 misunderstanding, mismatching, and the miscommunication is like a important like a message how to improve the current situation. So based on this condition, we should consider the structural and non-structural measures. So based on this condition, special panel by the ministry started 2018. Issue discussed in the panel is how to prevent emergency spillway gate operation. And the first one is how to utilize rainfall prediction for flood control. And if possible, a preliminary release conducted, we can store the more water in the reservoir. And how to optimize the reservoir operation. And the second one is how to give the message to the downstream as a risk like issues. And in case of how much water coming and how much inundation level will be expected. This risk communication is very much important nowadays. So several discussion, we have 3 principles. One is structural measures, and other one non-structural measures, like preliminary risk operation, we can conduct it like this. And before the flood coming, we can slightly draw down to save the more storage volume. And the second point is for long-term point of view, we should keep active storage volume for safer flood operation. So in this case, management of reservoir sedimentation is very much important. And the last one is how to risk communicate with the downstream communities. We should more inform about the risk information, not only like urgent time. In the normal time, we should have communicate and education and discussion is needed. And after 2018 flood, several dams already started this kind of preliminary release operation. This yellow one is newly started, mostly in the western part of Japan. And not only like multi-purpose dams, including flood control, other like originally designed of hydropower irrigation, water storage dams, also like supporting to flood control now is increasing like this. And last year, 2019, the heavy like super typhoon Hagibis attacking to the Kanto area and the Tohoku area, the very huge volume of water coming to the river. And again, we can discuss about the excess ratio to compare to the historical maximum. And this area is very much like a high ratio. And this area is well matching is like real damages. Many levee breaches occurred in this area. And this river area is like very much severe damage occurred. And this is like coincided with high excess ratio. And under this condition is many more than 100 dams is conducted flood control operation. But again, the 6 dams spillway gate operation conducted. And if we consider to the why this kind of dams is full of surcharge. Of course, a catchment area and dam volume is very much different case by case. So here is one index equivalent rainfall ratio, flood control volume divided by the catchment area. This is equivalent to the rainfall rate, and this is a real accumulated rainfall. So checking the 2018 Typhoon Hagibis, and in 2019, some dams is almost full, but keep the water storage, not the spillway operation. So important message, this equivalent ratio is less than 100 millimeter is relatively small compared to the recent severe flood impact. And also how much water coming is very much important to compare the flood volume. This ratio and this 4 times is accumulate ratio 2 compared to this equivalent rainfall rate. As 4 times is more is very much risky. So if such kind of dams exist, we should carefully conduct the preliminary release or actually dam upgrading for long-term point of view. So this is one example in Kusaki Dam in the northern part of Tokyo area, Kanto area. This dam is very successfully drawdown to keep the storage volume for flood control. If the ERRI ratio is checked, originally 80 millimeter, but because of this drawdown operation is more than 140 millimeter. So without this operation, it is highly possible the flood release spillway gate operation is conducted. So this kind of a careful operation is very much expected nowadays. So 2017, MLIT, they conducted the new policy initiative for dam upgrading. Many aspects for dam upgrading, for reservoir sustainability, adaptation, climate change, of course, environmental issues should be included. But maybe flood control objectives, dam heightening, install the additional flood control structures, flood bypass tunnels is a new interesting options. And the sedimentation, the reservoir sedimentation management, and also operation optimization also important. This is one example, is dam heightening is directly store the water more effectively. And nowadays also another option is a new bottom outlet, increasing discharge capacity. Why this kind of new bottom outlet needed? If the downs inflow is coming like this, preliminary drawdown needs some enough discharge volume in the lower level. Additionally, starting the inflow, we should keep this kind of storage prepared for flood control. Without this kind of a bottom outlet, we cannot equivalently release to the inflow or discharge volume, but the additional bottom outlet can keep preserved water storage for flood control in the peak. So such kind of new installment is very much effectively control the flood. This is one example in the Tsuruda Dam in Kagoshima Prefecture, completed in 2019. In these cases, after the severe flood, government is decided to install the 3 large bottom outlet, more deeper level. This kind of very much updated technology to install this kind of bottom outlet under operation under keeping the water. This is very much important challenges for future. And another challenge is sedimentation management. As you know, there are 3 options: reducing sediment inflow, and the sediment routing, and the sediment removal. So today I'd like to show some information about sediment routing issues. In Japan, we have also doing many challenges to keep the safe storage volume, and sluicing and bypassing is very much unique and environmental friendly options for sediment management. And this example is a Koshibu Dam in Upper Tenryu River. This dam is newly installed this kind of bypass tunnel to save the active storage volume in the reservoir. And this year in June, July, we have like a periodical rainfall event occurred in this area. Almost 300 hours is operated this bypass tunnel, and more than 2 million sediment is passing to the downstream. This is very much successful operation. And the last point is new challenges. This kind of like a preliminary release is very much effective, but still we have uncertainty for the like rainfall and land prediction. So sometimes is water coming is not so equivalent to the drawdown water volume, and sometimes is mismatching in the rainfall prediction is no preliminary release is a risk overflow. So we should consider that this kind of like a trade-off dam operation is a flat risk reduction and secure stable water supply. And nowadays also renewable energy is like hydropower production is very much important. So we have started the SIP model under the governmental project to develop this kind of like trade-off issues. So this is some schematic diagram. Based on this kind of ensemble rainfall prediction, the long-term and the large ensemble data can be utilized for more effective dam operation. So based on this kind of like a rainfall prediction data after downscaling, more high resolution data, and we can conduct the rainfall data and the inflow data. And finally, we can check the like prediction of a necessary storage volume for flood control. And sometimes also like lower data can be utilized for the how to secure the water. And those data we can like ensemble high and the storage volume and to optimize the reservoir operation. And finally, we can like optimize all reservoir in the catchment area. This is like a real record during the Typhoon Hakibis last year. 55 ensemble data is like obtained. And this is an example. This kind of like data is can be like provided ensemble high rainfall rate data and also ensemble like low values. We can check these two values to necessary storage volume. This is flood control volume. And how much percentage is excess the active storage volume. And in this case, is 5 days before typhoon landing, we can detect the importance of preliminary drawdown. And at the same time, the lower value, we can like obtain the target downstream volume, drawdown volume, increasing gradually, and after keeping the security water level. This kind of, let's say, the SIP ensemble preliminary release operation is using the long-term ensemble rainfall data and optimum drawdown level. So balancing both flood and water security risk. And this kind of like a rainfall prediction is also important for sediment management. If the sediment sluicing operation with a partial drawdown, before the flood, and how much water coming and which timing we should draw down for sediment sluicing, and how much water can be expected for recovery. This kind of like a drawdown and refill operation almost equal to the flood operation. So drawdown for operation for sediment sluicing and drawdown for flood control almost like a matching to be considered at the same time. And this is one example is like a Kyushu area, hydropower dams in Miyazaki Prefecture. Last recent Typhoon Haishen is passing the western part of Kyushu Island. In this case, it's a drawdown operation conducted these two dams and effectively like capture the inflow volume and the drawdown operation. This is a very much like important actions for reservoir sustainability. This is as a conclusion is under this kind of like a climate change impact, extreme rainfall with linear precipitation zone and the super typhoon is like increasing. The important options is dam upgrading and integrated management important. today's IAHR-APD, we have a good collaboration for this kind of initiate this kind of field, hydrology, hydraulics, river dam engineering. And this last slide, this special aspiration to the Dr. Suzuki, Japan Weather Association. And recently, Japan Society of Dam Engineers recently published these 2 videos, because how to explain the dam operation and the dam environmental management to the public. This is now is important to the society. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Sumi. Very interesting presentation. We can take some questions. Is there any question from any audience? Please. Okay, here is one in the Sapporo venue. Okay. Please come here. Sit down here. Introduce yourself.
Very much. My name is Yamada from Hokkaido University. Professor Sumi, thank you very much for introducing the very challenging activities regarding the dam operations in the latest years in Japan. I have questions regarding how to utilize the benefit of ensemble approach for the dam operation. I think this is really challenging in our countries to think about both the flood control and the water security purposes. So it's, of course, now in Japan, we are towarding these directions, the stochastic-based approach, I think. At the same time, somebody need to interpret probability information to deterministic information for judgment. So under the SIP project, could you explain how you are going to achieve the interpretation from probabilistic information to deterministic one? Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for kind of important questions. We are discussing how to utilize this kind of data. Important message is in case of large reservoir, we need some time for drawdown because discharge capacity is sometimes limited. So our advantage is long-term issues. This ensemble data is 15, almost 2 weeks in advance. And maybe 1 week we can judge and gradually start a drawdown. And the important point is not so a large volume or discharge, because excess discharge is sometimes risk downstream community because in the not flat times. And also sometimes hydropower dams is very much keen about the loss of energy. So this kind of energy saving and risk saving starting is very much important. In that case, ensemble data is a very much good hint, how much percentage risk is already started and how much water availability is expected in the total flood events. And this kind of data is very updated a daily basis. So we can modify it or change, sometimes stop, and sometimes started to recover. This kind of a decision is very much updated. That is our direction.
Oh, I see. Yeah, thank you very much. So can I add
a
small question relating to these issues? So you raised the importance for the communication between the scientists, government, and community, the local people. So regarding this topic, the risk informations, do you have any idea how to explain the quantified the risk to the society?
Okay. Important point is dam is not perfect. Sometimes it's let's say the limited volume, but sometimes a very large volume, but sometimes a limited volume. How to effectively utilize such kind of system And the operation rule we should explain first. But also sometimes it's like over like capacities like impact occur. And it is important to this kind of like what kind of risk is exists. Not only urgent cases. In the normal time, we should have a communication with downstream people. And sometimes it's directly to inform to the like a target like facilities, for example, like hospitals or like of course like city government is important, and but like a direct communication also very much important.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your kind questions.
Thank you very much. Is there any more questions from audience? Anybody? Anybody? So anybody can ask anything. Okay, let me ask then one small question. I heard that not only for the dam, for the flood control dam, but also the like irrigation, the dam for irrigation or electric power generations are planned for the preliminary release for the flood control use. Those are already like those are only planning or already done like this also in Japan?
Yeah, as you know, there's like a new governmental guideline already started. All this kind of like water use dams is started. This kind of preliminary like drawdown.
Oh, I see.
We already communicate with some of them, the target hydropower company and also prefecture government to utilize this kind of like ensemble data. And they are very much interested in our products. And we are like communicate with them. And the feedback is very much important to how to like update our model and how to utilize their operation rule. And the final important point is like how to like write this kind of like rule in the kind of operation procedure, because sometimes it's like risky to change and not matching to the operation guideline. So like how to like include like operation guideline is very much important.
I see. Thank you very much. And then let me ask one more. What happened if for example, the electric power generation dam release the water and empty, and then no rainfall happens, and then who's gonna pay for the like loss of the water? Yeah.
Actually, the government have like now is like a new system to compensate this kind of loss. But my opinion is it's better to like check the both risks, flood risks, and also like water security risk. So this data can surely is like minimize this kind of like mismatching.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I think it's time to move to the next speaker. Thank you very much, Professor Sumi. Thank you very much. Okay, next keynote speaker is Dr. John Nelson from USGS. He's now in Denver, I think. So John, ready? Are you ready, John?
I think so.
Okay, so John is I know him. John and I have been friends for like 30 years, 40 years. Yeah, and we are working together for the rivers, morphologies, and many things. And we enjoyed a lot traveling around the world, eating lots of good food in the world. And I think he's the best friend of mine. And I think he's one of the best like river morphology scientist in the world. Okay, thank John, please. John? No?
Yes,
okay.
I am here. I'm going to pull up my slide.
Yes, please.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me, especially in this difficult year, to give this presentation, both IHR and the organizing committee. And, you know, this has been an unusual year. I think you all know that. And some of the things that have, you know, we've never seen before in our lifetimes have happened this year. First time things. Some firsts are kind of sad. Some firsts show our resilience. I think this meeting is a good example of that, that we can still proceed ahead despite what's going on in the world. And, you know, some of the firsts that we see are just a little bit silly. For example, I've given many keynotes, but this is the first time I've given a keynote talk without any shoes or socks on. So I'm sitting home in Colorado. I'm happy to talk to all of you. I miss all my friends in Asia. I haven't been able to travel very much this year, but I'm sure we'll get back to normal soon. So today I'm going to talk about a general Lagrangian tracking methodology for river flow and transport. And this is something that I've been working on with Yasu for about a year. And many of you are familiar with Eulerian methodologies. And generally, when we learn about how to calculate flow and pressure and things like that in fluid dynamics flows, including geophysical flows such as those in rivers, we tend to think about Eulerian techniques, including either measurement or computation of velocity, pressure, and perhaps concentration at a point. But there are a lot of problems for which a Lagrangian approach, where we actually track things through the flow field, are really advantageous. And you know, an obvious example of that is pollutant dispersal, where we want to know where something that's spilled in the river, we want to know where it goes. And sometimes we don't just want to know concentrations, we actually want to know where specific parcels go and where they are stored in various places. The same is true for sediment, sediment tracking, sediment storage, movement of biological agents. There's a lot of problems where actually being able to follow things through the flow field are important. And that's really what this presentation is going to be about today. Now, the general problem of figuring out what a particle does in a turbulent flow is a very complicated problem. Most of you have probably had at least superficial acquaintance with the particle equations of motion and turbulent flow. For example, from papers by Maxey and Riley and others, where, you know, those equations are very complicated, and you have to have a fully resolved turbulent flow field to do the field computation. You have to know not only velocity and pressure at some discretized grid, but you have to know it well enough to integrate, for example, the pressure around the surface of the particle, or use some empirical lift or drag closure. It's a very hard problem. But for real world calculations, there are simplifications to that approach that are pretty powerful. And one of those was introduced a long time ago by our friend, Mr. Rouse, the Rouse mechanics, where we assume particles follow the flow perfectly except for their settling velocity. And that's the kind of simplification that we're talking about here, where we use the particles and we assume they're close enough in density and behavior, and small enough relative to the structure of the flow that they follow the flow, except perhaps for some small settling or other active behavior in the case of biological agents. So that's kind of the methodology that we're going to follow. Now, when we solve flows in nature, we usually use Reynolds average equations, not always, but typically for real world calculations we do. That means we have a problem. How are we going to characterize movements associated with turbulence if we Reynolds average over that part of the flow field? And that gives rise to the idea of characterizing turbulence as a random walk with an advective component that we add to it so that we get complete realization of the flow field. And I'm not going to go through all this, but basically the first equation, there's just a general statement of a position vector of a particle at some future time. It's just its position at a previous time plus an advective component, the second term on the right-hand side, plus the velocity, advection by the particle velocity, which could be a settling velocity, plus a random walk term, which is characterized by a vector L, which is randomly chosen from a Gaussian distribution with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And K, the turbulence diffusivity, from whatever Reynolds average flow model we're using. Now, those second terms in the second term of this equation having to do with the gradients of depth and gradients of diffusivity are typically very small in rivers. I have a paper that just came out in ecohydraulics where we evaluated that term and found it was 2 to 3 orders of magnitude smaller than the other terms in the equation. So as have many other authors have done, we neglect those and we get the simple equation 2, which is just that the position is the previous position plus advection by the flow field plus any velocity of the particles such as settling or an active behavior plus a random walk characterized by the diffusivity of turbulence. Okay, so no more math. Now we're going to just, well, maybe a little bit more. So just as an example, here I've written just one component of this equation as a position. So the x position is the x position at time 0 plus advection plus a random walk. So pictorially, it just looks like this. That's 3 time steps. So we start with 4 particles at the origin. They are advected downstream. They're all advected the same amount, but then there's a random walk associated with the turbulence such that they differentially are advected by the turbulence. And this is the way they are moved by the turbulence is consistent with the model of turbulence we've used in whatever calculation we've done for the flow field. So this is a simple idea. It's been around for a long time. So let's look at just a very simple example just to give you an idea. This is a model of the Delaware River. It's actually about 170 kilometers, I think. And the black line through these bathymetric LiDAR data set tiles is actually the coordinate system. So we zoom in, it looks like this. And we zoom in more, we have solutions like this. So we have a flow field throughout 170 kilometers of this channel, and we also have a diffusivity field, in this case from a very simple 2-dimensional vertically averaged flow model. We now look at a small reach and have a line source across the river and let it be advected downstream. That line source deforms, river goes faster. In the middle, there's a very simple single thread river, and we see how these particles are moved through the river. Now, these particles might represent, for example, a spill of a pollutant, or if there's no settling velocity, they could be larvae, just things like that are passively advected. So that's the simplest example of what a Lagrangian model of something moving in a river looks like. Now, oops, sorry. If we use that kind of approach and we go, this is a larger river where we did a dye study, just a picture of the dye study. There's a little boat in the center of the image. That boat has 5 people on it. So this is a pretty big river, and that's a lot of dye. So if we do dye studies and do the same kind of particulate transport, we know the source, we know the volume of the dye. So if each particle can represent a known volume of rhodamine in this case, and we can compare the predicted and measured values at specific locations throughout the river. When you do things like that, you get very good fits between the data here shown as measured the gray dots and the concentrations predicted by the particle movement here shown as the black line. And I've also shown some spatial variability in the cross section on these plots. But the basic idea is if you truly have a passive material and you treat this with a 2 or 3 dimensional model, you can do a very good job of predicting what goes on. Now, let's look at some of the complexities, some of the problems with this kind of approach. If we go to a more complicated river, and this is part of the Snake River, I'm going to first do an animation of this upper tile showing you the movement of particles through this river, which has a lot of irregularities, a lot of lateral separation eddies, and a lot of complicated flow structure. So I don't know if you can see it, but there are particles starting at the upstream end and advecting now down through the reach. Underlaying this particle motion, there's a graph in blue and orange, which is a little hard to see in this big slide, that's showing you the particle count in each cell of the model over the entire run period. So it's an integrated measure of exposure, if you will. And what you see is that the highest exposures, or the time with in each cell, the number of particles times the time spent there, over the entire run is not where the peak concentration is. So if we just want time of travel, a very simple model with not very many cell points works very well. If we want to know things about exposure or how much intake of a certain pollutant that will be at a water intake, we actually have to know a lot more. We need to know where do particles spend a lot of time. And unfortunately, places where the particles have a hard time getting into are also places particles have a hard time getting out. So in this lower inset, you can see a little better what goes on. The particles are trapped in eddy zones. And in fact, even though the highest concentrations instantaneously are seen in the thalweg of the channel, particles in these relatively slow moving eddies spend a long time in those locations. And what that means is if we want accurate predictions of that, we need a lot of particles. In this case, we did calculations with as many as 10 million particles to get really good resolution. And that's one of the issues with this approach, which I'm going to come back to. So let's move on. So the good things about Lagrangian modeling is since if the particles don't interact, it's completely parallel. If you have 100 cores, it's 100 times faster. It's fantastic in that regard. It can work across a range of solvers. And of course, I'm thinking of IRIC, which is the public domain solver suite and interface that many people in Asia and others in Europe are collaborating to provide as a sort of a public service. It has 18 1 and 2 and 3-dimensional solvers in it, and including turbulence resolving solvers. And so we thought it would be good to add a Lagrangian tool to IRIC that would work across a range of solvers. And that's reasonable to do. It's a lot harder to do with doing a conventional Eulerian calculation. It also allows examination of physical effects. If you have access to different dimensional models or different turbulence closures in your solver set, you can very quickly get insight into what the differences are in the predictions. It's also easy to add simple active components, such as movement by larvae, yo-yoing up and down, things like that, settling for sediment. So this is a very general approach that applies. The bad things about Lagrangian modeling is that especially if you need high resolution in low concentration regions, the computational expense is high. You need a lot of particles, and most users don't have the capability on their own machines to run massively parallel codes. So many important problems aren't well treated. Also, most developments for Lagrangian tracking are grid specific, and they don't work across a range of solvers. So about a year ago, Yasu and I started talking and collaborating about how to solve this problem and come up with a general treatment. So our development goals were to build a routine that worked for 1, 2, or 3D. That's actually not very hard. It's generalizable. Second, we wanted to build a routine for Lagrangian tracking that would work for any grid. That's not so easy, but we came up with some pretty good methodologies. I wouldn't say that's perfect now, but I think we have a pretty good methodology worked out. And the most challenging part was to try to figure out a way to make it fast enough to be used on the kind of computers most of us have on our desks. And that seemed a little harder, at least for complex rivers where we need to know high resolution in storage zones and things like that. So the way we approached these is to come up with a general coordinate system search that works for any grid or flow model. It essentially treats the velocity points as data and forgets the original computational grid, replaces that with a general coordinate system that could be the same grid for some models, but it doesn't have to be for others. The other thing we came up with is the idea of cloning particles, and I'll talk about that maybe with an example later on that'll make it more obvious, but the idea is that you can have the user specify a region where he wants high resolution, and the particles will automatically clone. Each particle has some weight associated with it, whether it's sediment or temperature or a chemical constituent or a toxic material, whatever, there's some amount of mass. You can divide that easily, preferentially, in the regime of the calculation, and you can also put them back together. And then we call that cloning and colligation. One is the opposite of the other. And that's our trick for trying to make this whole thing faster. And of course, as always, we want this to run as a solver under IRIC and to work for a whole bunch of different solvers, 1, 2, and 3-dimensional ones. So from the rest of this talk, I'm just going to show you some example calculations to help you to understand how this works and the kind of information you can get out of it. This is a reach of the Colorado River. It's an unsteady 2D flow calculation. As you can see, it's sort of eddy flow vectors, but you see the vortex shedding, at least for this 2D case, you see some simple 2D vortex shedding and sort of inherent unsteadiness. So this is for a constant discharge, but the flow field has this variability. Now, if you do conventional particle tracking in this, that reach, particles come in, some particles go into the eddy, most of the particles go downstream, and you get a few particles in the eddy. They don't stay there very long. It's hard to get into the eddy and it's hard to get out. So you can see what the problem is. We don't end up having very much resolution, concentration field in these storage zones themselves. So this will, the next slide will illustrate cloning. So now we're going to allow, first we're going to specify a region of cloning, and I've shown that in pink. So what I've said computationally in the interface is I've drawn this polygon and said, any particle that goes into this region, if the concentration is less than some amount, it's going to clone. And cloning can happen. One particle can turn into 2 particles, it can turn into 3, 4, 5, whatever. It's user specified. The weighting of the particle is adjusted accordingly. So this is conservative in whatever substance that we're calculating. So now we can do this calculation with cloning, and generation refers to how many times cloning has occurred, in this case up to 12 times. So you see a few particles go in the eddy. They quickly realize they've been left alone, and inside that cloning polygon, they densify themselves so that we get a high resolution. Over time, as they bleed out of the eddy, the generations get higher and higher. So the user can specify the maximum number of generations and essentially set the maximum sensitivity of the computational model. So now let's go on to another example, 3-dimensional effects. This is not an animation, it's just a still picture. These particles were released at the upstream end of these very simple sign-generated curved meander bends. These are based on a laboratory experimental setup, so it's quite small and quite shallow, and it has perfectly uniform bathymetry with point bars and pools. The top of this calculation shows the surface velocity dispersion from that initial point source. The middle shows the response of the particles to the vertically average flow, and the bottom picture, or the bottom panel, shows particles that are in the lowest cell of the flow. And you can see, obviously, particles in the lowest cell move much slower than those in higher cells, so they don't go very far. You can also see particles tend to be more spread out with the vertically average model, because you don't get concentration of the flow against the bank as you do because of the effect of secondary flows. So on the surface velocity on the top, you see that particles leaving a bend immediately cross to the concave, the point bar side of the next bend, and then as they go through the bend, they move to the outside. Whereas on the bottom panel, you see when particles go through the bend, they move toward the inside because of secondary flow. So no surprise there. But these effects are very, very important in a lot of real world situations, and we're going to look at that next. So on January 1st of this year, New Year's Day, at about 9 o'clock in the evening, a Burlington Northern train was derailed because of a rock slide. The top picture shows the train in the river. That was taken only 2 hours after the accident, and this is in a very remote area. The train didn't get removed from the river for quite some time. As you can see, it was a pretty effective dam. The picture in the lower right shows that train the next day when the sun was up, a little better picture showing what happened. And you can even see some of the detritus from the rock fall that caused the accident. So this effectively blocked the river, and it dumped between 10 and 20,000 liters of diesel oil into the river. In a very short time, I got a phone call because I have bathymetry for this reach. And over the next very short time, Yas and I burned some midnight oil, and we made a prediction first very quickly with a 2-dimensional model, and then with a 3-dimensional model throughout the 40 or 50 kilometers downstream that were of greatest concern. And we provided those results in KML files, animations in Google Earth, so that the first responders who were doing cleanup could see where we could expect the oil to be. I'm just going to show you a couple quick examples. Here's just one reach showing the oil coming in with the two-dimensional model. So again, this is vertically averaged, very little storage, a little bit. Along some banks, you get some storage, and then we'll go to the three-dimensional model, which has curvature effects and other things in it. And you see there's more tack on the bank, especially on the island in the upper center of the picture. You get more storage, and perhaps even more so downstream on the right bank looking downstream, you get quite a bit of storage. And that's because there's just general curvature in this case drives the surface velocity against that upper. It's not very surprising, but the point is these were, in using these to actually go out and clean up the oil, this was very important because it showed where it happened. 2D results weren't too bad, but 3D results were clearly better in that regard. So this is just a still, the top is 2D and the bottom is the 3D, just showing the slight difference in the results. So a little more oil went behind the island in the three-dimensional calculation through the smaller secondary channels, and more oil was pushed up against the bank on the right side of the river throughout this reach. So of course, this is just one short reach of 50 kilometers, but it did illustrate the importance of the 3D effect. So moving on, the Kootenai to looking at a Kootenai River floodplain connection. This is a reach of the Kootenai, same river with the fuel spill, but about 50 kilometers downstream. This river was levied in the early 1900s, and as a result, there were what used to be a system with a rich group of tide channels and floodplain ponds. It became an isolated river with essentially a dead floodplain. Now this is being restored, and especially the center part of the reach we're looking at, where you see those two wetland areas, was chosen to reconnect the river to the floodplain. And we used the particle tracking and associated flow models to analyze different alternatives. First, we did 2D calculations. I'll skip through these quickly, both for intermediate flows and for floods to show, well, to get a calibration so that we could do shorter runs for these particle tracking, and also just to see where connections were most likely easy to be made. So the hydrographs I'm going to show you in the stage is shown here. The only thing I want to point out here is in the upper panel showing the flood discharge. There's 3 large peaks in this flood. This is 2018. In the bottom panel, note that even though the flood peaks all are about the same, 40,000 CFS, sorry for the archaic units, the stage increases quite a bit from the first one to the second and third. And that's because there's a lake about 60 kilometers downstream, and there's a backwater effect as the lake fills during the flood event. So what you're going to see in these calculations is sort of a pulsing of the flood, but with higher elevations in the main channel each time. So here's an example of a zoomed in breach. We're going to look at this wetland on the right-hand side of the river at first. And I've changed the scaling, so you're really going to get, you're not seeing any detail in the river itself. All the detail is going to be shown in this large wetland. There's also another input besides the channel itself. There's a little channel called Trout Creek that comes in on the upper right-hand side of this, on this image. So you can see the connection at the very top of the slide to the main channel. And in this case, there's no breach. There's just this outlet channel, which is a consequence of this Trout Creek incoming stream. So first I'm going to animate this. And you can see now this is a 2-month calculation. So the main river is coming up, flooding the floodplain, going back out, flooding it again, higher stage, and then one more pulse and going out. So that's with no breach. And go to the next case. Same thing, no breach, but now we're going to introduce, sorry, now there is a breach. No, I think I've got the wrong slide here. This is basically the same thing with the different depth of. This is the one, I think I stayed on the same slide there. So this one now is with a breach, and the breach is about in the center of the slide. So at first it starts out looking the same, and then the river floods and you get water coming into the floodplain through the breach channel, and you get a much different pattern of velocity and filling and emptying of the channel. And finally, this is the same one, but with a different breach up in this area. So it's hard to look at these sort of depth and velocity maps and get a very good feel for what the river is really doing. So now we're going to look at particle tracks for this. We've got lots of particles moving by in the main channel. And as the flow comes up, we'll see these enter the floodplain. So right now, the only source of the particle is in the main channel, the Kootenai. There's no source from Trout Creek. So we see water come in, pulse out. Really not much river water goes in. And then the breach is activated. Water comes in from the breach, but it immediately goes back out the lower channel. Now, if we go to the next slide, now we're just going to put particles in Trout Creek and look at them. So now we see water coming in from that side channel, filling up the pond and eventually spilling out. At the same time, the main channel is increasing in stage and discharge and will ultimately start coming back in. So the flow will reverse in that outlet channel coming up here shortly. There we go. It reverses, goes in, then goes back out. And then there should be another pulse. So you can see we can get a lot of detail. The velocities in these ponds are only 2, 3, 4 centimeters a second compared to the velocity in the channel. So they're very hard to resolve looking at conventional techniques. But with this kind of methodology, you can really see how different breaches will affect the connection between the main channel and the flow itself. Almost out of time here. I'll skip this. The last example I want to show, I'm just going to skip to the end here. It's just showing that you can use the same kind of calculation for a sedimentation. So here we've got a flood and a floodplain pond, but this time we give the particles a settling velocity, and we can see particles going into that pond and cloning, so we can see a quite detailed velocity structure, coupled main channel floodplain connection. So we can see gyres developing in the floodplain, and first one connection and then another connection further upstream occur. And ultimately, when that floodplain pond gets full, water goes in at the upstream connection and goes back out on the connection where it used to go in. So it's a very complicated system. And you can actually use those particles with a settling velocity to get a sedimentation pattern in the flood pond over that flood over a 2-month period. So in conclusion, Lagrangian particle tracking is a really powerful tool for analyzing a lot of different river problems. And we believe cloning and colligation helps to provide the spatial detail we need with low computational costs, and that this sort of general approach allows people to easily compare 1, 2, and 3D approaches. Future work, we're already involved in looking at multiple particle populations and having particle interactions for flocculation and geochemistry, and the inclusion of the particle tracking in the upcoming IRIC model coupling capabilities for multi-physics and multi-grid problems is going to be a big step forward. As always, the solvers and the interface are freely available at www.i-ric.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. It was very interesting presentation. So we can have some questions from the audience. Is there anybody? Anybody? Everyone understood? Okay, let me then ask. Let me ask.
One question from the.
Okay. Good.
No.
Toshiki.
Zoo.
Yeah, I have one question. Thank you very much for your interesting presentation, Professor Nelson. I'm Zhu from Nagoya University, Japan. I want to ask one question. Is because the random walk is depend on the time step, so the result is the result sensitive to the time step?
Yes, it's very sensitive, and in fact, we enforce that the time step must be such that the particles cannot cross over a single cell in one time step. So it's like a Courant condition, but it's really just to make sure that your interpolation is accurate. So the time step has to be shorter than the lowest velocities, the grid size divided by the lowest velocities, or the minimum grid size divided by the lowest velocity. So you can have a time step that makes it, or I should say the highest velocity. So you see that the particles cannot cross a cell in less than a single time step. Otherwise, the interpolation is inaccurate and you get poor results, as one might expect. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Is there any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, let me ask one question.
I think the time's up.
No. We have still lots of time. Yeah. How do you predict the how do you count oil density or oil thickness, or I don't know, concentration oil? I don't know. How do you calculate from the particle numbers into oil?
So in that case, I knew the volume of oil, 20,000 liters, and I prescribed a release of particles over an estimated time that the oil leaked out of the tanks. I did some sensitivity analysis, but I think I ended up using, I think it was about 4 hours for the time for the oil. The next day, divers went in and inspected the tanks and said the tanks were full of at that point. So the oil was out because oil is quite buoyant. So knowing the volume and the time and specifying a release of particles at a given rate, each particle represents a certain volume of oil. And then I assumed it was only at the surface. So there was no mixing, nothing like that. I just assumed it was sitting on the surface and was advected by the surface velocity. But each particle, I actually don't remember off the top of my head, but I think each particle represented a liter of oil. So from that, I could compute where things ended up and how long they took to get to places, where things were likely to deposit by because of their proximity to banks or vegetation and things like that. And that's the information that we provided to the first responders for cleanup.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So maybe it's time. Thank you, John, again.
Yep.
Thank you. Nice presentation. Thank you. Okay. The third keynote speaker of this morning is Professor Xu Dongfu from Tsinghua University. Unfortunately, Professor Fu cannot join this meeting online, but we have received a video presentation from him, and it's like 15 minutes. So we will show his video presentation. Okay, please.
Good morning, Chairman and dear colleagues. I'm Xu Dongfu from Tsinghua University, Beijing, China. My talk today is about alluvial barrel river morphodynamics subject to landslide dam in Tibet Plateau. First, background and motivation. Qinghai Tibet Plateau is called the roof of the world and the third pole of the earth. Its eastern and southeastern edges are featured as a landscape of high relief and deep valleys. Along the route of Sichuan-Tibet Railway, the relief can reach 2,000 or 3,000 meters. In this unique landscape, mass movement happens frequently, landslides, rockfalls, and depth flows provide episodic sediment supply to the mountain river system, rapidly shaping the river morphology. For example, here, this is a blocked river and these materials. Meanwhile, subject to tectonic activities, massive earthquake also happens frequently. The earthquake events enhance episodic sediment supply into spatial patterns. One pattern is that lots of earthquake-triggered landslide dams are distributed along the active fault, crossing the headwater streams. The other pattern is that landslide dams are distributed along the main stream of rivers, for example here, instead of active faults nearby, resulting in different spatial configuration of landslide dams and dam lakes. Landslide dams forms and usually fails shortly afterwards, resulting rapid morphological processes in river channels. Here are pictures of Yigong Dam and the Tangjiashan Dam. We see heavily incised but residual dams after 10 years since dam failure. So, in terms of river morphology in the region, what's the equilibrium state of rivers if it exists? Also, what's the response of rivers subject to strong disturbances? For alluvial rivers, we have learned that the river can reach equilibrium state under cycled water and sediment supply. A hydrograph boundary layer forms near the inlet here. Fluctuations in riverbed are limited within the boundary layer, and outside the boundary layer, the riverbed keeps stable. In terms of morphological response after disturbances, the red law or the delayed response model has been widely applied. We have found, however, that the delayed response model holds for bed elevation adjustment, but fails for gravel size adjustment. For mountain rivers on Tibet Plateau, considering bedrock exposure, episodic sediment supply, outburst flood, and active tectonics, what are their morphodynamic characteristics? These are our objectives. We first study the existence of equilibrium state of alluvial bedrock rivers under varying sediment supply. The MRSAAC model is adopted. In the model, eta B denotes the elevation of bedrock surface at bottom. Eta A denotes the effective thickness of alluvial cover over bedrock, and LMR denotes the characteristic macro roughness scale for bedrock. A sortation abrasion model for bedrock incision is implemented, which considers both the cover effect and tour effect of alluvium. The Exino equation is applied to the evolution of alluvium. The relation between cover fraction PC and alluvium thickness eta A is described with a linear function. We define RH as the time fraction of higher supply, RQH as the high supply rate over average supply rate. We design several cases of temporarily varying sediment supply with constant flow discharge. Here are model inputs. When considering a constant sediment supply as a baseline case, we see that the river finally reaches an equilibrium state with a constant slope for bedrock elevation and a constant elevation and a constant cover fraction after 1,200 years. Under cycle sediment graph, the river is found to reach its equilibrium profile after much longer time of 6,000 years. Instead of constant slope, the equilibrium baroque slope varies downstream with low values at upstream and high values at downstream. The reason is the nonlinear relationship between baroque incision rate and alluvium cover fraction. Not surprisingly, as a computational domain is extended, the equilibrium baroque slope far downstream approaches the value under constant sediment supply, where the alluvium wave is damped out. It implies the adjustment exists primarily within the sediment graph boundary layer. For the alluvium cover, if thickness adjusts in the form of sediment graph boundary layer with the boundary layer, there is repeated aggradation and degradation. Such behavior is similar to that of alluvial rivers we observed before. We further investigate the effect of stochastic sediment supply with constant flow discharge. We assume an uniform distribution of the value of RQH, the ratio of high supply rate to average supply rate. This figure shows the value of RQH in the first 320 years. For the three cases with no randomness, we found that the larger the QH, the larger the spatial variation of equilibrium baroque slope. For randomized sediment graph with uniform distribution, however, the baroque profile is fairly close to that of the case where RQH is 9. Then we move to the morphodynamics caused by landslide dam formation and failure. We can observe the effects of outburst flood and active sediment process. A morphodynamic model with the Suminen equations for flow hydronics and the Exino equation with active layer formulation for alluvial sediments are used to characterize dam failure processes. We connected the data of 4 landslide dams and their outburst floods to verify the above-mentioned morphodynamic model. We see satisfactory simulation results of the outburst flood hydrograph for the 4 landslide dams. That is, the model is capable of simulating the dam outburst flood. For an baroque alluvial river in equilibrium, our research question is, how does the landslide dam as well as its outburst flood affect the morphodynamics under different time scales? Here we study both when landslide events. To study this problem, the outburst floods is simulated by the fully unsteady shallow water equations. The alluvial baroque morphodynamics is simulated by the MRSAAC model. Only uniform sediment is considered here for simplicity. With the given input parameters, we determine the water and sediment supply for equilibrium state. 3 values of initial alluvium cover fraction applied, that is PC equals 0.2, 0.5, and 0.8 respectively. The profile of the landslide dam that introduced into the channel is shown in this figure, which is typical observed in Tibet Plateau. We first show the results on flood time scale. The outburst flood has a duration of about 12 hours. For the bed elevation of the landslide dam, the value of initial PC has no effect on its deformation process because of its complete cover of alluvium, we also see exponential curves as the first order approximation for bed elevation adjustment of dam crest and dam toe. For the bedrock incision, we see considerable incision in bedrock due to the outburst flood. The largest incision is shown when the initial PC is 0.5 with an incision of about 10 millimeters in 12 hours. It is about half-year uplift. Bedrock incision becomes much slower after 12 hours when the flood has finished. We then study the morphodynamics in decades, a much longer time scale. We see a downstream migrating alluvium wave stay for several decades. In decadal scale, for larger initial PC, that is 0.8, the alluvium wave deforms primarily by diffusion, with the deposits persisting for as long as 50 years. For small initial PC, that is 0.2, however, the alluvium wave deforms as a combination of diffusion and advection, with the deposits persisting for less than 20 years. That implies the alluvium wave resulting from landslide dam can stay in this region for tens of years. To quantify the diffusion and advection features of alluvium wave, we check the peak point of the wave. As the red arrow shows, the vertical trace denotes puny diffusion, the horizontal trace denotes the puny advection, and the trace between them denotes the combination of diffusion and advection. Results show that for larger initial PC, that is 0.8, there is no evident advection before the first 40 years. For small initial PC, that is 0.2, however, advection occurs much earlier and stronger. Here, we provide an analytical explanation for the advection diffusion behavior of bedrock alluvial rivers. We result the external equation for alluvial bedrock rivers into an advection diffusion equation, where Ca is the advection speed. The smaller the cover fraction P, the larger the advection speed Ca, and thus more evident advection. For the extreme case of fully alluvial river, that is Ca is 0, the equation becomes a nonlinear diffusion equation without advection term. For bedrock change in decades, we also see that the landslide dam deposit is to a net uplift of bedrock elevation, namely bedrock bump, due to the cover effect of alluvium. This net uplift stops until the alluvium wave propagates outside the reach of interest. In an even longer time scale, up to thousands of years, we see that the bedrock pump can stay for thousands of years, that is 2,000 to 20,000 years, before it migrates upstream outside the inlet. The larger initial value of PC, the faster the migration is. In terms of temporal variation in bedrock elevation, interestingly, we see multiple scale patterns. That is, on the decadal scale, here, bedrock seems to arrive at a steady state and stop uplifting, but on the millenary scale, bedrock is adjusting very slowly and getting back to initial equilibrium after thousands of years. In terms of temporal variation of alluvium thickness, however, we see no evident multiple scale pattern because the alluvium cover supplied by landslide dam moves out of the ridge in decades. We then move forward to study the effect of repeated landslide dams on alluvial bedrock river equilibrium. We first consider the equivalent sediment supply of landslide dams by distributing material of landslide dams into the dam occurrence interval continually. We compare 3 cases with different dam height and time interval of dam occurrence. The 3 cases have the same equivalent sediment supply. In particular, case 3 considers 4 different events with decaying dam height within a cycle of 200 years. For bed elevation, the river aggrades continually due to repeated landslide dams, resulting in an upward convex bed profile due to cover effect and the uplift effect. At a location upstream of the dam site, the 3 cases show similar uplifting processes, suggesting little impact of downstream repeated dams. At the location downstream of the dam site, case 2 shows faster uplift, but case 3 and case 1 shows similar trend. It implies the effect of the nonlinear relationship between bedrock uplift and the amount of alluvium supplied from the trend as the downstream section. We may expect and finally equilibrium state. In terms of bedrock slope, the 3 cases show similar pattern on the repeated landslide dams. The bedrock slope decreases in the upstream with an upwards migrating wave, and slope increases in downstream with an expected equilibrium limit. In terms of alluvium thickness, similar patterns can be observed for the 3 cases of dam occurrence. The alluvium thickness increases in the upstream due to upwards gradation and decreases in the downstream due to downwards degradation and increased slope. At last, we observe the temporal variation in bedrock slope and in alluvial thickness at 2 sections, although the final equilibrium had not been reached yet at the time of 4,500 years. The equilibrium of both bedrock slope and alluvial thickness may be expected. Here, we have several pieces of take-home messages. Alluvial bedrock rivers may have their equilibrium state in the sediment supply conditions. The coupled impacts of dam outburst flood and tectonic uplift can be observed on river market dynamics. The downstream migrating alluvium wave resulting from landslide dams can stay for decades, but the upstream migrating bedrock bump can exist for millennials. Finally, I would like to thank my colleagues who contributed knowledge to this talk and to my research on Tibet rivers. They are Mr. Yongpeng Lin, Dr. Chen Gean, Dr. Hongbo Ma, Professor Gary Parker, and Dr. Li Zhang. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. He's a professor who is not online yet? No, okay. Okay, so we can't ask anything. So please contact personally if you have any question to him. Please. So that's the end of our keynote lectures today. Thank you very much for the keynote lectures and audience. Thank you very much. And afternoon session will start from 1:30 Japan time. So we still have 1 hour and 10 minutes, something like that. So see you in the sessions. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.